Hello, and welcome to Revolutionize Your Relationship. I am your host, Eva Blake. And in this series, I'm talking to a variety of really brilliant experts who are uniquely qualified to educate and empower you to master your mind and body intimacy, to unleash your passion, and to create everything that you desire in life and in love, because you're absolutely worth it. And so I'm really excited to introduce you today to Cam Fraser. Cam is a certified professional sex coach, sexologist, counselor, and tantric yoga teacher. His work integrates scientifically validated, medically accurate information about sexual health with the sacred teachings from mystery traditions. And as a coach, he helps men go beyond surface level sex and into full-bodied, self-expressed, pleasure-oriented sexual experiences free of anxiety or shame. Hello, Cam.
Hi there. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, welcome here. One of the things that I love about your bio that I just read to you is that in so many ways over the last decade, it has been almost word for word exactly the same as mine. So I think that we have lots in common. So I just want to jump in and let's talk about sex. You ready?
Yeah. Perfect.
Okay. So I want to just start with, we know that exceptional intimacy or pleasure or passion that happens between two people, right, is really a result of self-intimacy, self-knowing, self-generating passion. And yet there is a huge stigma in many societies around the world on self-loving, masturbation, solo sex, generally having a healthy, vibrant sexual relationship with oneself, right? I mean, I hear it in people who come to me and they're like, I don't talk to my partner about masturbation. I don't do masturbation. I don't want to talk to anybody else about it. So I want to start here. Like, what is the importance and what are some strategies to engage with our own eroticism in a way that feels good and empowering and really moves us forward?
Yeah, I love this question. And the importance of self-pleasuring for me and for the people that I work with. And I use the term self-pleasuring there very deliberately rather than the word masturbation, because masturbation tends to have a lot of baggage.
Yeah.
There's a lot of negative connotations to masturbation, particularly for men and people with penises. Oftentimes when I use the term masturbation, the image that gets conjured up is maybe sitting in front of a computer with their hand on their mouse and their other hand on their cock, and maybe just kind of jerking off in a very, I would say, non-conscious way, just kind of going through the motions. And self-pleasure, on the other hand, like the name suggests, is just doing whatever you find pleasurable to yourself in that moment, which might not even include genital stimulation.
Yeah.
So I like to delineate between those two things. And so I teach people how to cultivate, I teach men particularly how to cultivate a self-pleasure practice, which involves tapping into what it is that they find pleasurable, which is the first bit of importance with regards to, taking this solo time for yourself, is to explore what your turn-ons are, what your fantasies are, what your desires are, where you find pleasure in your body. I give men this exercise called pleasure mapping, which is just starting at their toes and over the course of an hour, working their way up themselves to the crown of their head and just touching themselves in novel ways. Most of us have these really great tools on the end of our arms that we can use to pinch and scratch and rub and pull and slap and pinch and do all these other amazing types of stimulation. And I just encourage some experimentation with that. Just explore these new types of touchings in different parts of your body and just collect information, collect data about your experience, and just kind of get this robust understanding of what it is that turns you on. That's the first kind of part of the importance, I suppose. The second part then is the kind of other side of the coin, which is what doesn't turn you on, what turns you off, in fact, and what are your boundaries and what are your limitations, and where don't you want to go with your self-pleasuring, and maybe where do you want to put a boundary up that you can kind of explore by yourself, so that then, and here's where it kind of becomes partner oriented, so that then you can express that and voice that to your partner. If you know there's something that really doesn't, it's not enjoyable to you, it's not pleasurable for you, in fact, it's something that you don't want to do because you've explored that by yourself and you kind of have that understanding, it then gives you something to go, hey, this is what I'm not into. I don't really like when you do this, or when I get touched in this way. So can we not do that? And instead, can we do this? Because I really like it when I scratch behind my knees, or when I play with the back of my ear, or whatever it is. So you've got this framework then, because you've explored it yourself, to share with a partner, and hopefully your partner's doing the same thing, so that they bring to the table their turn-ons and their fantasies and desires, as well as their boundaries and limitations and turn-offs, so that you've got this collaborative approach to experiencing pleasure and sharing pleasure with one another. So that's the importance I see in self-pleasuring, at least.
I love what you said about pleasure mapping, that you can start from the tips of your toes and go to the top of your head and really incorporating the entire body. And I think that that is sorely overlooked when we think about sexuality. I know it's the same conversation that I have with women who come to see me is, where else in your body can you experience pleasure? How can we expand the notion of pleasure? How can we expand the notion of what is erotic or what is sensual, and get out of the stereotypes, right? One of the things that we talked about around this, how do we get to pleasure, really, is how do we get out of performance anxiety, right? Because, when men have come to me and they're like, they call it performance anxiety, or when other people just say, I'm not present, I'm distracted, I'm checked out, I want to run away, is whenever we feel that we disconnect from ourself, our own sensations, or we disconnect from the person that we're with. So, what are you sharing for to men, how to get out of the performance, I have to be a certain way, and into the, I'm actually present in the moment?
Yeah. So this is very common, probably the most common concern or complaint that I get from men and from couples is that he is not present, and he's anxious about what the sex is going to look like and whether he's going to last long enough, and all these other things related to like the I guess with regards to the performance, right? Hence the performance idea of performance anxiety. And so the first way that I work with guys is challenging that narrative about what sex is quote unquote supposed to look like. Mm-hmm. Oftentimes the performance anxiety comes because sex has to tick a certain number of boxes in order for it to be successful sex, or in order for it to count as sex, or whatever it is that they've kind of said is, okay, this is the standard of good sex. It has to involve an erect penis. Typically that penis has to get erect quite quickly. It's got to involve a certain amount of penetration, and that penetration has to last for a certain amount of time. It's got to involve their partner orgasming as well, if not multiple times, and it's got to end with an ejaculation, and it has to be in that chronological order as well. And
it's a very narrow window, right? It's a very specific, 100%. Very narrow, very narrow pathway.
Yes, yeah. So so the narrowness of that really limits your experience of sex and pleasure. If that's I kind of equate this to a meal. If that's the only meal that you eat for the rest of your life, that's the only sex that you have for the rest of your life, it can get pretty stale, pretty boring. And so so the first piece of work that I do is kind of like a cognitive piece of work or a psychological piece of work of just challenging that story. Like, does sex have to involve an erect penis? Does sex have to involve penetration? Does sex have to involve an ejaculation? And just kind of poke holes in this really linear way of thinking about what sex is. Exploring I use the analogy, instead of A, B, C, D, what if we went A to C to B to D to F, then back to A, and we made sex a bit more cyclical rather than linear. There's a multiple ways of just challenging that really rigid framework for sex. That's the first thing that I do, is challenge that story. The second thing then is like a real more practical exercise here, which is if you're being sexual, either with yourself or with your partner, and you start noticing that you're getting up in your head, oh God, I'm not gonna last long enough, or I don't know if I'm gonna get an erection, or I don't know if I'm gonna maintain an erection, or I don't know what this is gonna look like. If those thought processes start going, if that kind of, in Buddhism they say the monkey mind starts kind of chattering away, then a really simple practical tool is to just stop, pause what you're doing, take a moment and focus on the sensations that you're feeling in your fingertips. And so if you're by yourself, you can be touching your body, you can be touching your genitals, you can be touching an object in front of you as well. Like I got a sex toy in front of me, so you could be touching a sex toy, you could be touching anything, could be a pillow. Or if you're with a partner, focus on touching them for a moment. Just, let them know, just communicate, say, hey, I'm noticing I'm in my head. Can we just stop and I need to just drop into my sensation of, and typically when we start to focus on the feelings in our fingertips, we notice that it actually feels quite enjoyable. It feels quite pleasurable. Our hands usually get quite numbed out. This is like a take on Betty Martin's exercise of waking up your hands, which is a really beautiful exercise. But you can use your partner as the thing that you're kind of touching to wake your hands up. And usually if you're enjoying yourself and you're enjoying touching your partner is going to be enjoying you, enjoying them. And so that's going to create this kind of positive, pleasurable feedback loop, which if you take your time and you slow down and you do this, will eventually start to bring you into your body, into the pleasure you're experiencing, which, because you're experiencing pleasure, will typically bring an erection back, or will typically bring your arousal back, or kind of set the mood back into that kind of eroticized state. And you're able to like continue. So if you need to do that a couple of times, you'll start to notice that the sexual experience is this kind of like up and down, oscillating wave-like experience, rather than this really linear graph that just kind of heads up to a peak and then just topples off at the end like a cliff. We can have this really beautiful up and down flowing experience of sex, rather than this really straightforward, like a steam train heading to that end goal of ejaculation. So, so those are two things that I really like to do: is the cognitive thing, and then the body-based thing.
Yeah. So as you were talking, I thought of two things. One is that, I've noticed that when we get in our head, when I've worked with clients and they go from here in their body up to their head, that their breath starts to shorten. And so when our breath shortens, that takes us higher up, right? Into the arousal of I'm vigilant, I'm looking out for, I'm nervous, I'm anxious. I have to look out for something that may go wrong, right? Whereas when we slow down and we get into the sensations, then our breath drops, and then we're actually able to inhabit our sex, inhabit our guts, inhabit our butt, right? As I'm sitting down, right? I'm sitting on my butt. So that's the primary place where I'm making contact with the chair. Same kind of idea, right? And I think that that's just so critical, right? Because now it's like creating this intentional relationship with the systems of the body. If I'm intentional with my body, then I can be intentional with your body as well. And the other thing that you talked about here in this up and down, right? It's like in the ideas of permaculture, is like you actually want an edge that has the most possible surface area, because in that surface area is where you have the most diversity, the most life, the most opportunity, the most creativity in that space. And so when we do have this A to F to G to Z to where are we going to go next, we're creating it together, right? Then generally that's the place where we have the most, the most excitement, right? And the most possibility. So I really love these images that you're offering.
Yeah, thanks. I like the inclusion there of the permaculture idea as well. That's quite cool.
Yeah. Right. Because we're all just a living system, I'm an earth, you're an earth. We're all on this earth together.
Totally.
I want to ask you about passion, because I think that, many of the media representations of passion are in line with what you just said. You get an erection, it's really hard, and then you go all in. It's this penetrative thing. But it also is wild mayhem, right? Clothes are tearing off, you're being pushed up against the wall, and then cut to the end and it's over. Right. And so, I really want to explore this idea of how do we get to passion in ways that are tender, slow, intentional, and vulnerable, in ways that really flip that narrative on its head, as you said. So I'd love, your perspective on that.
Yeah. So I kind of think whenever someone mentions the word passion, I think of Sternberg's triangular theory of love, which is, love's comprised of three things, which is intimacy, commitment, and passion. And a lot of times, we find that couples are really high on intimacy or commitment, but the passion tends to wane, particularly in like couples that have been together for a little while. And I'm noticing that in my own relationship now that we're 5 years in, we've got a little child, priorities have shifted. And so the passion, that kind of stereotypical passion of tearing your clothes off and jumping into bed spontaneously, that type of passion is starting to shift into a subtler, gentler, more vulnerable type of passion. So this is very close to my heart and very close to home at the moment. So with regards to cultivating that, I suppose, and kind of flipping that script and pursuing that more tender passion, something that has really been instrumental for myself and my partner is like taking time to sit with one another, to sit and eye gaze, or to sit. The way that we frame it is we sit in ceremony with one another, and we drink either, we've got like an herbal tea that we both really like, or sometimes we'll use ceremonial grade cacao, or sometimes it'll just be a coffee as well, just our morning coffee, and we'll sit and just kind of be with one another. There's no like expectation that it's going to lead towards any explicit type of touch. It tends to be quite a vulnerable experience, especially when we're eye gazing and not having to use words to communicate with one another. can see the nervous system soften when we just sit and take a couple of breaths. And a lot of this cultivates, yes, intimacy, but it also cultivates passion, particularly if we decide to do it without any clothes on, or we decide to maybe sit in like a what might be called a yab yum position with her sitting on my lap, especially with no clothes on. So there's all these little subtle things that we kind of do to kind of keep a little bit that sensuality, a little bit that touch with one another. There's especially now with a little human in between us, that's been a big part of our love language, which is touch, has kind of been a bit lost. So just reconnecting that touch and I guess like having this slow burn is what I'm getting at here, rather than being like not seeing each other for 8 hours a day, then coming home and then the match kind of igniting this big bonfire. It's this, we're kind of around all the time, but it's like, here's a little touch here and there, or here's a little message here and there. And just keeping that kindling nice and warm over the course of a day, which kind of cultivates that vulnerability. You kind of do have to be a little bit more vulnerable to kind of share something and put it out there without the expectation that it's going to lead to sex that night or sex that hour or sex at that kind of next minute. So that's something that's really worked for us. That's a really good strategy for us, at least. But I oftentimes as well think of like, there's a really good strategy that I use for couples, which is the yes, no, maybe so game, which is something that I've found is really good for just communicating, like learning how to communicate your like what you're passionate about and what your passions are with regards to your sexual passions. Because when we go into a sexual experience, oftentimes it's like, okay, I want to have passionate sex, but like what does that actually,
what does that mean?
What does that mean? How do we get there? And so I like to use this analogy of going to the movies, right? You want to go see a particular genre of movie, just like you want to have a particular genre of sex. What's the language and what are the themes within that movie that make you know that that's the type of movie, that's the type of genre that you're seeing? Like, how do you know it's an action movie? Because you've got these things that you define as action. How do you know you're seeing a romance movies? Because you've got this language and these themes and stuff that have to do with romance. So think of that as the same as sex. Like, if you want to have a really passionate, romantic, sensual sexual experience, what are the things, what are the themes, and what's the type of language that you use within that to kind of foster that experience, right? Can you use really emotive and sensual and emotional language to yourself, to your partner, to each other, to kind of really foster that experience? Or if you want to have like a really thrilling, action-packed sexual experience, what are the things that make up that genre of sex, right? Maybe it's a different type of language. Maybe you've got to use a little bit more dirty talk, or you've got to be a bit more assertive, or you've got to change the way that you show up energetically in that space. What if you want to have something that's a little bit more like of a dominant and thriller, psychological thriller type of experience, right? Maybe you want to use some language that's a bit more edgy and possibly even playing around with the power play of submission and domination. So checking what those things might be and just being mindful of them as you bring them into the experience can really change how you show up in your passion for your partner. Because all those experiences, passion comes from that place of caring for your partner. Like, if you want to be passionate, it's from that place of caring. So, if you're being mindful of how you're showing up in those experiences, that can be a really powerful way of just showing your passion in a different way, I guess, is what I'm getting at here. It doesn't have to look that one stereotypical way that we kind of mentioned at the start.
Yeah, beautiful. I love both of these options that you just laid out, right? The one, the eye gazing, right? Because it's so, in some ways it's so soft, but if you've done eye gazing, like you and I both have, you know that it can get really intense, really deep, really fast. Like, you can go places without speaking if you're just willing to soften the shell that most of us put on just simply by living in the modern era, right? And just being there in that present place where we're not talking, where we're not trying to use words. Like, there's something so magical about that. And then this other exercise of really trying to use like what we understand in like popular culture and media. Like how do we want to create something for ourselves based on a language that is outside of us that we can actually bring into the bedroom, something that is common that we can use together, where we're not having to like take a sex class in order to figure it out, right? And so that both of these ways are, what I love about both of them is that they're really gentle and friendly in a lot of ways, right? It's not a lot of heavy lifting.
Yeah, it's not very intimidating, right? There's a good foot in the door, and then from there you can take it into those more intense kind of workshop spaces. But it's a really nice entry point, I find.
Yeah, yeah, and so much about who am I? What do I bring to the table? What do I want to bring and to show you? So I really appreciate that you land that mindfulness. If I'm mindful of myself, then that actually is a form of generosity and care that I am offering to my partner. And I think that a lot of times in the space of sex, especially with the taboo and the shame and the past experiences that we've had, that we can be really either self-absorbed, really worried about self, whether it's performance anxiety or, the arrogant side of it. I'm only in it for me. Or we can be so other focused. Is my partner having a good time? Am I doing it right by them? I don't want to focus on me. I want all of the energy to be going on them, that we're not really in a kind of flow or kind of balance where I'm tuned in and turned on with me. And then I'm showing up and I'm creating the space, or I'm offering like this space right here that's immediately in front of me. Now I'm really welcoming you into that.
Yeah, that's what I like to frame as sexual leadership, is creating that space, right? And it's not leadership from a place of dominance or hierarchy or delegation. It's leadership from a place of that more horizontal, lateral space of almost leading by example. It's like if you want your partner to open up and be more vulnerable and be receptive to things, model that. Like, be vulnerable yourself, be open, be receptive to things, and help create that container, create that space. Be present with the awkwardness, or be present with the feelings of anxiety that you might have. And if you need to, voice those things like, hey, this is quite tough for me. I'm having a bit of anxiety, a bit of tension in my body when I kind of share this. I'm a bit afraid that you might, think I'm weird for saying this, or whatever it might be. But model the things that you're looking for in a sexual encounter, and invite your partner to join you there as well, right? Kind of create that space for them, and have that outreached hand to welcome them in and say, hey, the water's warm, the water's fine, come in and join me, and let's explore what's here. And that's how I frame sexual leadership for a lot of the men that I work with anyway, because the idea of sexual leadership for them is very much that kind of dominant oriented, let's say porn informed way of kind of being a quote unquote sexual man, I think. So so I kind of reframe sexual leadership to be let's say vulnerability oriented.
Yeah. And it's great because the pornography, the information that we get from pornography is, you don't talk about sex, you don't negotiate, you don't like, there's no conversation except, do you like what I'm doing to you? Which is really different than, what I call like, just say the sky is blue, right? I'm nervous, or I'm having fun, or I really like you. Like, let's just start by being Captain Obvious for a little while, right? And then once you get the hang of it, then we can actually go into deeper places together, right? And we don't get that from the pornography model, because it's a show. It is a performance.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's where the performance kind of mindset is really perpetuated and epitomized, I think. And there's a little phrase that I think Dan Savage used to say all the time, which was, ask your partner, what are they into? What gets you off? What turns you on? Just that simple question, like, what are you into? Just kind of creating that space to be like, oh shit, no one's really ever asked me that. Like, what am I into? And really giving them an opportunity to either voice what it is that they enjoy, or to voice, I actually don't know. Can we explore? Can we try some things? And if we try something that I don't enjoy, like that pleasure mapping exercise, you can extend that and do that with a partner, for example, and explore and collect information and data and treat it as an experiment with regards to their pleasure. And you might discover, a particular type of stroke or touch or stimulation that you thought they might really enjoy because maybe a previous partner really enjoyed it. But then when you do that with them, they go, oh no, that's actually a 2 out of 10 as opposed to being a 10 out of 10. And I actually don't like that. And that can be a really big learning experience for you. And the beautiful part of it being this game, the pleasure mapping exercise of the game, is it kind of takes the ownership or the responsibility or the pressure off of you. It kind of takes the personalization out of it. So oftentimes when our partner, this is particularly true for at least the men that I work with, is if our partner says, oh, I don't like that, a lot of men, and this has been true in my life as well, take that really personally and say, oh, I'm a bad lover, or I hurt her, or something's wrong with me, or something's wrong with her even. And so it becomes this big unsurmountable thing. And oftentimes, because men get so affected by that, a lot of women I found are reluctant to share with the men that they're being sexual with that a particular thing hurts, or that it's a little bit uncomfortable, that there's some pain there. That dynamic is really not super conducive for pleasure at all. So doing these little exercises and games is really helpful for kind of taking that pressure off and taking those personalized stories out of it. And you can just be like, oh, I was just doing this exercise as part of the game. It wasn't a personal thing that I was trying to do to get something from you, which is, I found also really, really helpful.
Yeah. And I mean, to go back to what you said at the very beginning, is that it's about data collection. And it's the same thing that I talk to with the people that I work with, mostly women, is what is the actual, just the general data? Like, can we get specific about the data? And so if we're going to do it in partner play, like how empowering that is to say, that's a 2 out of 10. It's just data, right? Now we take, as you said, we take the personalization out, but we also take the sting out of it. Because we're just looking at data, right? When you squeeze my nipple, that's a 0 out of 10, right? Yeah. When you just hold my breasts, that is a 10 out of 10. I mean, same general space, same general area, same hand, but wow, it makes a big difference when you just shift the 1 or the 2 degrees, right? And that being able to communicate with that kind of specificity is so valuable to create that connection, but also to feel empowered, to feel like, oh, I can actually change the direction of where I want to go with this person that I'm with. And now I trust. Now, if I'm trusting, now I can go vulnerable. I can go the next level.
Yeah. Totally. That foundational layer of, I can trust my partner to firstly to voice something to them, but also that they're going to listen as well, and that they're going to pay attention to what I've said, and they're going to be receptive to it. They're not going to freak out by it, and they're going to respond, appropriately. So if I say, I don't want you to, squeeze my nipple, they're not going to squeeze my nipple. They're going to, they're going to respect that. So having that foundational layer is, is paramount to then going deeper into those spaces where I think, for a lot of people, they want to go straight into those deep spaces. They want to dive into the deep water, and maybe sometimes they do, and it ends up being a little bit more disconcerting or troubling than they thought it was going to be, because they haven't done that foundational work of like just creating those spaces of trust and letting themselves kind of gently surrender step by step to kind of get to those deeper spaces of passion and intimacy and sexual experience. So those baby steps to begin with, and that shallow water to build that experience up is so necessary.
And, as you were saying, with a small child now in between you, the two of you, right? It's because our bodies change over time, and because our desires change over time, that this exercise that you've brought is really beautiful, that you can use every several years or every decade or after you go through chemotherapy, after your body changes, after you have a baby, right? That it's a foundational kind of practice that you can actually use throughout your life. It's not you're going to do it when you're 22 and then you'll never have to do it again.
Yes. Yeah. That's a very good point. Is you could do it 7 times, across a week, once a day, and it could change every single time you do it. And this ties into something that I say to a lot of men with regards to their own self-pleasuring. To bring it back to self-pleasure, is a lot of guys only focus on their genitals when they're self-pleasuring, right? They only focus on their cock, and then I say, well, then how's your sex life? Like, what are you doing sexually? And oftentimes they're only going for penetration. They just focus on trying to penetrate. And I'm like, look at the way you're masturbating, which is only focusing on the shaft of your penis and going straight for it, and going from 0 to 100. And now look at the way that you're having sex. You're pretty much going straight for penetration. You're trying to thrust and pump away like a bloody piston in a car engine. And do you think there's a correlation there? And oftentimes it's a bit of a light bulb moment. Guys are going, oh my God, the way that I'm masturbating is informing the way that I'm having sex. And so I say, look, if you can shift the way that you're self-pleasuring and like recondition and relearn like how to experience pleasure across your whole body by yourself, then when you're with a partner, especially when you're with a, if you're a heterosexual couple, when you're with a woman who might take a little bit longer and might need a bit more sensuality and a bit more full body touch than you might need it, then you're already kind of doing that. You're already reconditioning yourself to kind of experience that pleasure and not get bored by it or not feel like it's not doing anything or all these other stories that might come up for you. And then you start to implement that with your partner. So I say to guys, look, you're not just your dick. You can think of your body as one huge dick. That's one of my favorite sayings is you're not a dick, you're a huge dick. And and just exploring pleasure across your whole body, right? You can experience pleasure from the tips of your toes to the crown of your head, and so can your partner. And once you learn that about yourself, then you can bring that into your partnered experience and and start to work. I usually say to guys, work from the outside in when you're touching a woman, when you're with a woman, work your way from the extremities towards the genitals.
Yes.
And if you're a woman touching a man, something to be mindful of is doing the inverse of that, which is starting at the genitals and working your way out to the extremities, because that's typically how a lot of men have conditioned themselves to experience pleasure, is to begin with the genitals. And if you don't necessarily start there straight away, those things that I said before can pop up. They might be going, what are you doing? My cock's right here. Like this is pointless. This is boring. If you're like touching every other area. But if you can arouse the genitals first and then use that arousal to help spread it through the rest of his body, then that's going to be way more effective, at least.
What you're saying, but you haven't said explicitly, so I'm going to say it, is, man, make it a laboratory experience, create some experimentation, create exploration, right? Because, give yourself the time and just explore, right? And what I say to my clients is like, actually create kind of a laboratory environment where, as you were saying before, we're going to do this exercise, we're going to do this practice, and there's no pressure for where it goes, but we're going to spend 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes. We're going to put a time frame around it so that we can just play in that space together. And then there's no pressure one way or the other, but we can be curious. What happens if I do this? What happens if we do this together? What if we do this? And if we're in a conversation together and we take that pressure away, then so much is possible for, as you were saying just now, is really reconditioning us to create a different kind of relationship with each other and ourselves.
Yeah, totally. It's like lean into your curiosity is like, curiosity for me is a cornerstone of sexuality. And if you're not curious, if you kind of lose your curiosity, or if it's something that's kind of a bit foreign to you, that idea of curiosity with regards to sexuality, then that's when we fall into those like, oh, I'm just going to do the same thing again. And I'm just going to, watch this same porn or just masturbate the same way I've been doing. So that little bit of curiosity, because curiosity also lends itself to playfulness as well. And I think playfulness is missing from a lot of people's sex lives, is that kind of, I kind of think of like, in the sandpit, kids in the sandpit, just kind of like playing around with different sensations and textures and toys. And they've got all this stuff that you can bring that sense of, playfulness into your sexual experience, either by yourself or with a partner as well. And like we've been saying, those exercises and those games can help kind of take that personalization, help take the ego out of it as well, help take the sting out of any feedback as well. And it's an experiment. I love the idea of creating that laboratory setting and being able to kind of just collect information, collect data, so that you can use that, right? The more information knowledge is power. The more knowledge you have about yourself and your partner, the more powerful your sexual experiences can be.
And the less that we assume, the less that we guess.
Yeah.
Right. I know that when I've been in the guessing game with partners in the past, then I've been like kind of pissed off, like, why is this not working? Or I make an assumption and I'm like, how dare you not do this thing that I totally thought that you were going to be really into? Like, what's happening? So when we have the information, then we're not in that game, right? We don't elevate out of that and get into mind games with each other. We get to just stay in in the body, stay in the intimacy, stay in the passion with each other. So I love all of that, Cam. Thank you very much. Cam, it was wonderful to have you and really great to have this conversation with you. We have so much in common and so much that we are teaching in so many aligned ways to a variety of people. So I love that. I love that we're doing the same kind of work in the world. So thank you for existing. Thank you for being on this planet in this way. Thank you very much again.
No worries at all. Thank you so much for having this platform and inviting me on.
Absolutely. And for all of you who are watching, come back again tomorrow because there's going to be another juicy conversation around sex, intimacy, passion, and creating the relationship that you absolutely desire.